Thank you. As we already mentioned, I'm the executive director of the North Dakota Transmission Authority, but it's really the Industrial Commission in its capacity is acting as a transmission authority. So Doug Goring there he is. He's one of my bosses, one of the three industrial commissioners, along with the governor and the attorney general. So my job as a director is to support the building and acquisition of transmission lines, keep updated with grid issues with the regional transmission organizations, SPP and MISO, and then produce some reports and do some studies. I will just diverge since the boss is in the room. If you ever get a chance, their meetings are televised or recorded, and you can listen to them as history or in real life. But you have three gentlemen who care immensely about North Dakota agriculture, North Dakota energy. If you listen to them, the depth of their questions and the depth of their interest is outstanding. So you're in good hands. So thank you, Doug. So North Dakota is served by two regional transmission organizations, and the blue area is called MISO, Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, and that's the investor-owned utilities, MDU, Otter Tail, XL, and also Minn Kota Power Cooperative are in MISO. And the Southwest Power Pool serves the electric cooperatives in the region. One thing I'll just take note, Justin had asked me if the tariffs were going to impact electricity, and the answer is yes. You can see that Manitoba is in the MISO footprint, but probably the biggest area, the largest volumes of electricity moving from Canada to the United States, and sometimes vice versa, is over in the east there, Ontario. Grid reliability, or keeping the lights on, is vitally important to North Dakota, not only for the oil and gas industry out here, but agricultural processing, and yes, data centers, and industry as a whole. So that's why we are interested in keeping the lights on. And the question was asked when I was asked to speak here, is just to speak a little bit about data centers, and I'll get to that because they are huge loads and have an impact on the grid. But we aren't the only ones that are watching to see if the grid is reliable. There's a federal agency called NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Council, and they watch the reliability of the grid nationwide. Locally, that is done in our region. It's called the Midwest Reliability Organization, and twice a year they look at the weather forecasts, look at the state of the generation in the area, and changes in load to determine how the season will look. And so I'm going to share some good news and some bad news, but this is concerning news. In this last summer, the area in orange, which happened to be MISO, was at an elevated, it says, potential for insufficient operating reserves in above normal conditions. So if we would have had an unusually hot summer and some more power plants go down than usual, we could have had blackouts. Now the same goes for the winter forecast. You can see this not only includes the SPP area, but the MISO area. Both areas were at an elevated risk. Fortunately, we had a nice winter, except for about 2 weeks ago. But anyway, we made it through without any events. And this is really an elevated risk for reserve margins. So hopefully we'd have enough to make it through. But generators not only have to commit to their load, but also have operating reserves. So if one plant goes down, the other 16 can pick up the load. So some of the things that we do through the Industrial Commission, Doug and the other commissioners approved these studies, but the last Biden administration was had, like Jonathan or Jason was mentioning, we had some attacks on our coal fleet and gas fleet too. And Jason already talked about the MATS, or the mercury issue, and the greenhouse gas. So through the industrial commissioners approved doing some studies on the impacts that those rules, regulations would have on North Dakota's generation as well as the region's generation. And today we're about in the middle of a much larger study that is looking at North Dakota's infrastructure, both generation and transmission, to see how well prepared we are, or how we can grow the system to accommodate more oil and gas growth, more ag processing, more potato processing, and data centers. And that study will be completed. We hope to bring that to the commission the end of August. And then once the commission has reviewed it, it would be made public, likely in September. So these studies, and I'm just going to give a few, just a little highlight. This is the mercury regulations that were proposed by the last administration. If those regulations would have been enforced, now they're in abeyance, MISO would be unable to guarantee peak demand by 2029, just 4 years from now. The greenhouse gas rule, if you look at this pile of the graphs, the top area, the blue, is wind energy, and the yellow on the very top is solar generation. So while they produce energy, a lot of energy actually in the grid, you can't count on them being on 100% of the time. Solar for sure, not at night. And if the wind's not blowing, you don't have generation. So you can't depend upon it. And this greenhouse gas rule impact on MISO would be that they would be unable to guarantee peak demand by 2028, just 3 years from now. And in the SPP system, you can see where their load lines are above insufficient generation to meet peak demand beyond 2030. And that includes counting on wind between now and then. So how did this happen? Over the last base load or dispatchable load generation built in North Dakota, I think came online in about 1986. So since that time, there's been a lot of generation built by the picture there. The blue line is added capacity, but the capacity that's been added has been primarily wind energy and peaking gas facilities. So even though, for MISO, even though we've added a lot of capacity, I'm about to be signed out, okay? Just hit me. But in actuality, over time with this forecast, the red line is what is accredited capacity. So even though we've added a lot of generation capacity, it's not the kind of capacity that you can count on being on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Yep. So that next slide, and I'll just talk about it before, but it shows in SPP how and during the same time, there have been coal plant closures across the country. So the amount of capacity of coal or dispatchable generation has decreased and the amount of wind increased. So really the same scenario in both regional. So just give you an idea of the fuel mix in both SPP and MISO. You can see that there is a significant amount of wind in SPP, and MISO has less, but MISO has more gas generation. Next slide. And then more locally, these are the fuel mixes of the electric investor-owned utilities in North Dakota, and they're also pretty similar, except that XL has nuclear in it has nuclear while the others don't. Next slide. So, and these are the two cooperatives, generation and transmission cooperatives in North Dakota. Basin Electric serves this area. And for those of you that live out here would know that they have two pretty significant gas generation sites, one at Lonesome Creek, just west of here, about 5 miles, and then a Pioneer Station up by Williston, and then they're plans to build a very large 1,470 megawatt combined cycle power plant up by Epping, which is east of Williston. Next slide. So FERC, this national association of that looks at reliability, also looks at load growth, and you can see in the last year, this slide here, I don't have the pointer, but in 2023, they projected a forecasted peak of 39 gigawatts of additional 5-year growth. And in 1 year, that has gone up 5-fold because of the interest in specifically data centers. Next slide. So of that, FERC thinks that 6 gigawatts of that will be in the SPP region, which is our region, and 9 gigawatts of that in the MISO region, which is our area. But you can see the major growth is in the PJM area, 30 gigawatts, and I'll get to that a little later. Next slide. So United States has about 40% of the global market of data centers today. And that amounts to 25 gigawatts, and they expect to reach 80 gigawatts by the year 2030, so just 5 years. So perspective-wise, the Antelope Valley Power Plant at Beulah, or the Great Rainbow Energy Plant, Coal Creek, north of Bismarck, are about a gigawatt. So you need to build 80 Coal Creek stations by 2030 to just take up this data center growth. Next slide. So this was at a meeting yesterday, Dakota Electric Power Research Institute, and they show several scenarios of this data center growth, but you can see that just looking at the right side of the graph, that's a huge potential area of growth for the industry. So I like to think about now Congresswoman Julie Fedorchak is adamant that we should be aggressively pursuing data centers, because where would you rather have them, in the United States or China? Well, I think we can answer that pretty easily. And then, wouldn't you like them in North Dakota? And I'll get to a little bit more reason why. Next slide. So this is too hard to read, I guess. I realize that now. But the data centers of the majority, that line on the far left is Virginia. And there's a lot of countries, Paris, Seoul, and so forth, that there's a lot of growth in northern Indiana, and Texas is also being very aggressive to capture that growth. So Virginia is by far the largest concentration in the world today. Next slide. One of the things that is concerning is, again, these are awful hard to read, I think, for you people, but the size of the data centers. So this bottom table here goes from 10 megawatts to 1,000 megawatts. So we're seeing that these facilities that used to be 100 or 200 megawatts, there's more interest and more talk about even larger, huge power consumers. So like the verbiage there says, all of them, the data centers today are less than 500 megawatts. Most are less than 100 megawatts. But 60% of the respondents have requests for more than 500 megawatts. Next slide. So one of the groups that we've visited with is to learn more about the data center interest is the Association of Data Centers. You're an association of North Dakota Association of Land Reclamation. Well, there's an association of data centers. So the people that are involved in that are the Googles and Amazons and so forth. I believe there's about 34 members, but they outline the major things that they need to have a successful data center location. And it's, of course, access to fiber, access to water. They, in some cases, they need to cool it, but for certain fire suppression, they like clean, affordable energy. They're risk averse, a risk adverse place for climate, hurricanes, volcanoes. Land availability and costs, and the tax and regulatory climate, and how fast they can get to market, time to market, then access to skilled construction and technology workforce. Well, North Dakota can check every one of those boxes. Next slide. So where should they be, and what is North Dakota doing, or what are North Dakota utilities and the regional transmission organizations doing? Well, we're building out pretty significant transmission, and this is in this area up here. There's a 345 kV transmission line being built around the east side of Lake Audubon, so that there'll be a 345 loop around the state. And Basin is building significant generation up here. But one of the things that Justin mentioned was the amount of gas processing plants out here. And this is where I go back to Julie Fedorchak. Did he say 30, about 30 or a few more than 30 gas processing plants? So, and we want to utilize this gas to optimize oil production and the North Dakota economy. So if you have a gas processing plant, build gas generation right next to it, and right next to that, build a data center. Now, this is Claire's idea, but then you don't have to build pipeline, you don't have to build transmission, and you're right by the fuel source, very much like a coal mine mouth generation plant. So anyway, the good news is that there's transmission being built and generation being built out here, but we have to keep going and do it quicker and faster and better to meet the demands. Next slide. There's another 345 line being built from Jamestown to Ellendale. I'm just going to whip through these. This is a good news part, the investment by utilities in North Dakota to improve the reliability of the grid. Minnesota Power Elite is upgrading their high voltage DC line that goes from center North Dakota by the Milton R. Young station to Duluth, and they're increasing the capacity of that line from 550 megawatts to 900 megawatts. So you can put more data there. There's another line going from north of Mapleton from the Bison substation down to Big Stone in South Dakota. That's a few years out, 2031 completion date, hopefully, but another 345 line that improves the grid reliability of the whole region. And then there's a huge line called the North Plains Connector, which will connect from Colstrip, Montana to St. Anthony, North Dakota, and up to Center, North Dakota to tie in with that Minnesota Power and Elite line. And this is a high voltage DC line as well that will connect 3 electrical grid regions, MISO, SPP, and the west side. Grid United also has plans for 4 other lines like this down towards Texas. So this line will be able to carry 3,000 megawatts of power, so either direction. And the goal here is to be in service by 2032. So there's been another signal of the amount of interest in transmission build out is the number of grants that were applied for and received up until we don't know. With the activity in Washington, D.C., there's some question about the timing of these, but we're confident that the Trump administration is very pro-infrastructure and pro-energy. We expect that these will come to fruition, but this is the amount of dollars that have been awarded to projects that impact North Dakota, a huge dollar amount. So you'll see transmission build out and activity in North Dakota over the next 5 years. So it really comes back to this: grid reliability is vital for all of our industry, for today's farmers, for our households, our hospitals, but especially important for growing our economy and keeping our oil and gas industry vibrant, and also provide opportunities to participate in the data centers and AI processing.